Okay. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I meant the stream.
I can hear you through Discord. I hope our audience can hear us. Just no sound.
Yeah, none of the audience can hear us.
Okay, yes, we finally have sound. Sorry, everybody, for the serious delay by now, more than half an hour, but here we are. My name is Ruach. I'm here with Via, Kellen, Thomas, and we are about to look at the video of rationality rules. So let's just start. You guys want to introduce yourself?
I am Callan. I am a heathen and Sumerian polytheist, and these are my compatriots.
Thomas? Via? You there?
I'm Via. I'm a pagan, and I'm also trans.
How's the audio quality?
Yeah, we didn't hear Thomas either. I think he stepped away for just a moment.
Yeah, I think Thomas stepped away for a moment.
Hi, Mrs. Snarky.
So before this started, we were talking about how Dutch is really just swamp German.
Yeah, I do not agree with that.
Our audio is good.
All right, excellent.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thomas, how about you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to work through this. My name is Thomas, and I am a polytheist. So I am one of the few people here who are not trans. So I'll be coming along for the ride.
All right. Shall we start the video?
Sure.
Well, you have to introduce yourself first. You're a swamp German.
All right. Swamp German here. Well, my name is Ruach. I live in the Netherlands, obviously. I'm recently converted to polytheism, and well, I'm IT professional, and this is my first stream, so I hope I don't fuck it up. All right. With that, let's start the.
Oh, we're going to be starting with the good part first.
Yeah, was just gonna start at the beginning.
Yeah, do that for our sanity's sake.
Will do.
He should have ended the video after like 10 minutes.
Yeah, after that, it did start to go downhill.
Why hello, my fellow apes. I hope that you're well and that you've got a big cup of tea at the ready. Within this video, I'm going to thoroughly break down 3 things. That being 1, the mistakes that I made within my video titled The Athletic Advantages of Transgender Athletes. 2, the mistakes that my most prominent critic, Ethel from Essence of Thought, made within her reply. And 3, the malice motive that she and others have been and still are ascribing to me.
It start to go down.
Given this, there's many knots to untie, and so let's just get.
So, when it comes to this kind of stuff and being called a transphobe, what we have to be careful to do is distinguish between implicit and explicit bias. Just because I call you a transphobe doesn't necessarily mean you're out there shouting, all trannies need to die, or whatever. It could be that you have an implicit bias that has been engendered into you by our society because our society doesn't like trans people. continue the video.
Straight to it. This is the mistakes of many on transgender athletes. So let's begin by delving into my mistakes. As said within my previous video, I personally believe that my most impactful blunders were not actually my intellectual mistakes, which I'll cover shortly, but rather my tone, narrative, and sheer lack of sensitivity. Of which the most prominent example that people have pointed out, and one that I entirely acknowledge, is the clip that I showed of Joe Rogan commenting on Laurel
You
Hubbard.
can stop it here
Everybody's like,
too. Is it paused?
Yeah.
Okay, so this would normally be a good statement, but at this point, within the context of the conversation, his tone becomes pretty much irrelevant to the damaging information that he's released. If I were him, the information would have been the first part, not talking about any sort of tone or saying, I'm not a transphobe or any of that other nonsense.
I can see what you mean.
Yeah. Via, do you have anything to say?
Not yet. I'll have some words to say later on in the video for sure.
You'll have all the words.
Yes, all the words.
Every last word. All right. Continue, Ru.
this is crazy. She's an inspiration.
Yeah.
No, she's a guy. She used to be a guy, and now she's breaking these women's records. Like, what are we doing? This is crazy.
Yeah.
Within that moment, Joe was extremely insensitive, and by endorsing it, I was too, and I am genuinely sorry for that. In fact, let me make
Pause
something
this.
as clear.
All right, there we go.
So he shouldn't be sorry for how insensitive he is. He should be sorry for showing the clip to begin with, because the implicit assumption behind that argument is that that woman is not a woman when she is a woman.
I would just like to add that that I think this whole idea, sorry if I'm not articulating myself well, this whole drama about transgender athletes, I'm not really sure if this is as big as it should be. Sorry, I'm not articulating myself well, so.
I would say that it's probably as big as it should be, but not in the way it should be. Because so far, all the stuff I've been getting on Twitter has been as a result of this trash. If that makes sense.
I don't know if it makes sense.
Anyhow, let's continue the video.
As I possibly can. While I very much believed, and still believe, that there's a discussion to be had about the fairness of allowing women who have experienced
All right,
male
pause
puberty.
it here.
All right.
So this is something that I see get brought up a lot in conversations that people don't seem to be able to understand. There is no real discussion until you can show statistically significant results that somehow trans women outperform normal cis women. And even when you show that, you have to show that it's somehow relevant. If you do not produce that kind of data, there's no conversation to be had. You can continue it now.
To compete against women who haven't. Laurel is a woman, period. Another major mistake that I made in relation to tone is my whole narrative. Many have pointed out that by me saying such things as,
and so here we have a very real example of a young, talented woman losing a potential scholarship and career due to this issue.
I painted a picture of trans women essentially stealing competitions from non-trans women, and you're absolutely right. I really dropped the ball here, and I will do my utmost best not to make this mistake again. In fact, going forward, I'll be very conscious of my narrative and language altogether, as such a sensitive topic requires nothing less. Truly,
Except he
I
really
should
is.
have known.
Sorry, what was that?
So, I mean, later on in the video, and I guess spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen it, some of the stuff he sort of insinuates is just pretty bad. And also, flowering your language isn't going to cover up the ugliness of your ideas. That's just something to always keep in mind.
Yeah, that's very valid.
If someone
Alright.
said that, like, the cultural Marxists need to be destroyed or something like that, like, it might sound all fancy, but in the end, it just still says to kill the Jews. So, like, there's kind of an example there.
Exactly. You can flower up all your language you want. At the end of the day, your transphobic ideas, and no, I'm not saying person. I don't know RR individually. I'm sure there's implicit bias judging from what I've seen, but without knowing him individually, I can't say to what extent that bias necessarily exists. But you can still not be a transphobe, but still perpetuate transphobia.
Could I just ask a question? What's I don't know rationality rules all that well. What are his politics generally? Is he alt-right, alt-light, sort of centrist?
I don't know. Some of the rhetoric I've seen him use definitely comes across as a bit rightish. I've heard though from others, like from what I can gather from his friendship with Rachel, that he's probably a bit more centrist, but I don't know.
From everything that I've seen of him, he seems like he's just a tiny bit to the left of center, but is quite lacking on his ideas about trans people and some other concept.
Apparently, Snarky says that he's a Brexit guy.
Oh, what? Sorry, I didn't.
A Brexit guy.
Oh. So is he UKIP or Brexit Party or Tory or?
I would pray that he's not UKIP. That would Sargon. Oh, Sargon. Sargon, if that was a troll, that was the best troll ever. I gotta hand that to you.
Yeah.
If you went to that party to ruin it, I hope you do it again.
Anyway, I think we should get back to the video.
Yeah, we should.
I'm going to move on to my intellectual mistakes, but before doing so, I feel it's necessary to first address the repugnant motive that people such as Ethel are incessantly ascribing to me. As while I accept and truly appreciate many of Ethel's criticisms, I don't want to give the impression that I also accept the assertions of malice that she laces each and every with.
Oh dearie me, the ultralight man is here to teach us about his fears for women's sports. So what says he? What beckons the end of athletic womanhood? Of course, Stephen Woodford from Rationality Rules is jumping on the anti-trans bandwagon. Because when the Bible thumpers are too busy to blame us for every natural disaster on this planet, the trademark skeptics step up to claim that we're destroying Western civilization, piece by piece.
My motive and position was never, as Ethel and others have asserted, to attack trans women and their, quote,
Okay,
place in...
pause it here.
All right.
So this is kind of a big thing. If your motives aren't to attack us, then don't. What you're doing is you're devaluing all of our achievements in sports, what achievements we have, and the ultimate conclusion of the kind of argument that you're making is some sort of either at best segregation, at worst outright banning. So no, Essence of Thought was completely right in this case, because that's where the argument in the conversation leads, whether you want it to or not. It's the same thing behind. You'll see a lot of white nationalists try to disguise their ideas like this. They're like, we're not for ethnic cleansing. We just want separate. But equal treatment. Yeah, well, except not all land is created equal. So that makes separate but equal impossible.
Also, I'd like to add that intentions are one thing, but what one says is another. So one really needs to be sure about the impact that their words can play.
Yeah, this isn't just some sort of intellectual exercise. This is affecting real people's lives. You're quite literally attacking the achievements of real trans women in sports. If you're going to do that, you better damn sure have some data behind you.
And not only is he attacking the achievements of trans women in sports, he's also attacking, he's also putting down all the effort that we have to go through to get ourselves medically to the point that we are allowed to compete in the proper gender category.
That too, the amount of muscle loss and various other things, which I'm sure you'll give us more details on as the video progresses.
Yeah, I think it's very important to say that the words you use are just as important as the actual message you're trying to convey. It's very easy to use words that come over wrong, come over in a way that you did not intend, might be insulting, it might be just plain look like you don't really care. You really have to take your words into account. What are your words designed to do, and what could your words potentially do?
Exactly. Because, I mean, and this is giving him the benefit of the doubt. We're being pretty charitable here, actually. the other route you could pretty much go would be to basically call him an alt-right shill, which I don't necessarily think he is, because I like the principle of charity.
And I mean, I've seen lots of alt-right shills and actual alt-right people over the years, and he comes nowhere close. As much as I disagree and absolutely despise this entire video, he's nowhere near that level of extreme.
Yeah, he seems to be like one of those YouTubers who you see who, when, they can't talk about atheism anymore or get bored of attacking religious people, they either drift left or they drift right, and he seems to be drifting right.
That's basically the overview of YouTube atheism. Once they've beaten down Christianity to such an extent, they would just go with whatever is in vogue at the time.
And I know a lot of YouTube skeptics have talked about this issue where at one point attacking creationism just doesn't yield the same interest or views anymore. So they have to move on to either one side or the other politically, or completely radically change what content they're making.
I'd recommend watching one of the Hammered Out episodes with Ocean and Cirrus to discuss this.
Exactly what I had in mind.
Yep, exactly. All right, let's continue this monstrosity.
All right, here we go.
Public.
Just as a means to attack trans women and their place in public.
And I certainly wasn't trying to, quote, cash in on a far-right paycheck.
Taking up the pussy hat at the whiff of a far-right paycheck amused me. Because Woodford's personal beliefs aside, that is who he caters to these days with his Soft on Shapiro videos.
What's more, I never said that trans women should be excluded from sports.
If trans women are excluded from said sports,
as same point.
What's that?
It's pretty much the same point here, is that he's like, yeah, no, I never said that trans women should be excluded from sports. Yes, that's either what you're going to be saying at the conclusion of this argument, or you're going to be wanting something like segregation, which might almost be even worse, judging from history. This gets into a bit of ethnic relations, where you have like three main approaches to it, but that's another video.
He argues they should be,
I never called for the removal of trans rights.
and the way he used this to argue for the removal of their human rights, he was calling for the removal of trans people's human rights.
I didn't blur any critical information in my ACA video, and my views were never, ever based on any prejudice whatsoever against trans people.
Pause it here.
All right.
So, your views, you may think, are not based on prejudice, but, and I hate to be the sociologist here who points that out, they are. You cannot escape some sort of prejudice. You have to make assumptions about the world you live in general, like, for example, when meeting people, the first thing we'll notice about them is their gender, and we'll make essential generalizations about people based on their gender. You can see Doing Gender by the Journal of Gender and Society if you need a citation for that. We attribute essential characteristics, various things how we should behave, like you don't just go up to a woman and grab her breasts, for example. At least not unless of course you want to get hit in the face.
Or arrested.
Yeah, that too.
Although knowing America's court system, that can be quite difficult to actually get someone arrested.
Yeah, that's something we'll have to. That's another discussion for another time.
Agreed.
I would also recommend various videos by Natalie Wynn of ContraPoints. She goes through a lot of these concepts in a very informative way.
Yeah, she does. But yeah, in short, the first thing you notice and first thing you do is make a prejudiced decision about a person upon seeing them. That's the whole point. Society is not being transgender is an inherently political stance because it inherently challenges the political and the social norm, which is also one of the issues behind. I mean, we did a pretty bad job when we called it transphobia. We probably should have maybe called it something a little less frightening when it comes to that, which is why I use the term implicit bias. But the point is, either way, it results to the detriment of trans people.
Another thing is that, like, words like transphobia and other terms that we use a lot to explain why someone further to the right of us has a problematic stance, they generally don't yield much of an effect. So I've personally found in my experience that it's much easier to attack the argument and not bring up the fact that it's transphobic or homophobic or anything like that.
Yeah, that's good. Usually, when I will say someone is transphobic, it's usually the point at which I want them to fuck off, basically. Because I know there's no, like, reaching to them this way, or really any other way that I have at my disposal.
So in your view, what's the difference between implicit bias and actual transphobia?
Well, implicit bias is technically transphobia. But when I use the word transphobia, I tend to refer to explicit bias. So calling me a tranny, saying that I'm really a guy or really a girl just pretending to be this or that identity, that's explicit transphobia. Implicit is, well, pretty much this entire video, though sometimes it gets a little close to explicit. All right, shall we continue?
All right.
It's the fact that Woodford made his video from a standpoint of prejudice against trans people. He, as a creator, was acting on transphobic principles. When he made it, he formed his argument from sheer prejudice for trans women, based on preconceived notions and stereotypes of what they're like.
My motive, my concern, was and still is what constitutes fairness in sport. Trans women.
Here. Okay,
Okay.
here he acts very dramatic and whatnot, but really he leaves fairness as a fuzzy term, which he kind of has to do because, well, what are we going to ban? Are we going to discriminate by height? Okay, so all the short people get this, get to not compete with all the tall people, and no, we don't do that. That's the thing. Any sort of advantage or fairness that he's concerned about is nullified by various different phenotypical variations. He has not shown any sort of statistical data showing that there is an overall advantage for trans folk. And this just comes across as what which is actually excellently termed as a gender panic.
Also, there's more than just one way to make a sports league more fair, and most of the more effective ones would be completely aside from gender. Like, we could separate people by height or weight class or muscle mass or any of those possibilities. But to me, separating trans people from cis people of their gender seems like it's just completely an excuse for segregation.
Yeah, it's basically arbitrary. And the other thing also that I don't think he realizes is that his arguments for exclusion of trans people also puts a cap on cis people. So any sort of like restrictions that he puts on trans people in terms of like ability and whatnot, if a cis woman happens to meet those, well, now she's trans, even though she's cis. Talk about a little bit of a reverse and misgendering there.
Especially with regards to people of different gender, especially with people with regards to people who have different sets of chromosomes but still appear female or male on the outside.
Oh yeah, intersex stuff. We could probably spend hours and hours on. But in short, rationality rules would not be able to handle that. In fact, that was an issue that again appears in Doing Gender, is that they sent people out into the fields and people were a lot of times like, we have no clue because the society, some of them who even identify sex in different ways. So yes, this is all in essence to say that sex, like it or not, is a social construct where we choose to label arbitrary biological parts and things and put them into categories. Something I don't think he realizes.
It does become a bit arbitrary in the moment you're just talking about things like, well, he has male genitalia, she has female genitalia. Why did we start? Basically, we said at a certain point, well, on average, certain sexes have certain features that might prove beneficial comparatively. So let's separate it based on sex. But I mean, why not make, for example, a basketball league for people that are somewhat shorter on average instead of longer, which is a big advantage in basketball. I mean, sex is just arbitrary at that point. It doesn't.
Yeah, that's the whole point. Is that it's a very arbitrary thing to class people by. It's like, can't even really think. It's like, okay, I'm just going to I'm going to classify sticks by the amount of holes they have in them, and we're going to use them to play I don't know, some sport that doesn't require have any holes. It's arbitrary, in short. Now, apparently, there's some research that does indicate difference in terms of like advantage between various different sports, but that in itself, I'm kind of a bit on shake on shaky ground there. Personally, what I'd like to see is have a sport made to where it just eliminates all advantages for like everyone, and everyone can compete fairly, kind of like chess, actually.
Well, for chess, you need a whole lot of experience in chess.
Yeah,
But
I still
that's
remember
something
those
you
days.
can, well, you can actually acquire that. I mean, it doesn't matter if you don't have any other factors in.
Indeed. Anyhow, let's continue with this video.
I would just like to add into before we continue that I do HEMA, Historical European Martial Arts, and of course there are people who are stronger or weaker, but it's important that everyone who wants to be able to wield swords and other kinds of weapons can be able to do that, and they can do it quite well. And those characteristics may or may not have to do with gender, but HEMA's been actually really good at making at integrating male and female people in a really nice and equitable way.
That's more what I like to see as a sociologist.
And also, I'm a fencer, and in lots of sports, including mine, there's really no performance difference between men, women, trans men. It's based on one's individual skill, because it doesn't like rely specifically on muscle mass. There are like thousands of different nuances to becoming skilled in the sport. So separating people by gender at all is really like not an effective
Arbitrary.
way to, yeah, exactly, very arbitrary. And if you look at the results from mixed gender tournaments, like most of them will have like a completely even mix of men and women in like the top places.
Which gets us into the territory of sexism and sexist implications to all these various arguments that we're about to see. You find this a lot when you study sociology, that one sort of societal issue or societal prejudice is usually laid on the back of another. Or to put it in a nicer way, they intersect. Welcome to intersectionality.
Must be able to compete, and indeed as the gender they identify as, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's fair for trans women to compete in the same category as non-trans women. It might be, for
Then
example,
why are you even making this video? I mean, if they must be able to compete as the gender that they are in, then why are you questioning this? What sort of benefit do you hope to see other than creating a gender panic?
Perhaps it's just fire control to just
That's what I kind of think it is, but later on, when he starts like doubling down and using Noel Plum's idiotic arguments, you kind of get a sense that there's something a little bit more. I mean, maybe not. It could also be that this is entirely a reaction to being like attacked by others, and that's why he's doubling down. But that's for later speculation. let's continue.
Perfectly fair for those who transitioned before male puberty, but unfair for those who transitioned after. But we'll get to such details a little later. Now, in addition to defaming me, Ethel has been pretty much defaming anyone who won't publicly denounce me, including Matt Dillahunty, Aaron Ra, Thomas Westbrook, Telltale, Rachel Oates, and even Mr. Atheist.
Pause it here. Okay, so to make this clear, Matt Dillahunty has spoken out on it, and I have seen it. And from what I can tell, he understands to the degree that he thinks he's capable of, and the sort of a bit of the mistakes that RR has made. So I guess there's some bright spot in all of it. All right, continue.
Out loud. But yeah, for now at least, I'm done with this essence of drama segment, and I'll just reinforce that while I don't accept the following lacings of malice, I wholeheartedly accept and appreciate the intellectual criticisms.
Woodford utilised a basic bait and switch. He invited us to discuss the counter that trans women on HRT don't have an advantage due to said HRT. That was what he advertised. He then went on to assert that many of said traits remain in spite of HRT. That's when the switch took place. Instead of referencing articles on the differences between cis women and trans women who have undergone HRT, Woodford goes on to roll out articles.
Pause it here. This is actually something I very commonly see with people arguing this subject. They, for some reason, think that men are somehow relevant to women's sports. And I don't quite fully understand that. You're not competing as a trans woman in a women's league. You're not competing against men. Men aren't relevant.
Perhaps it's just a way of setting some sort of benchmark to measure things, but I'm not entirely sure about this either.
My guess is that it's just to create more gender panic, but sociologically speaking, where, these people are going to destroy women's sports, yada yada yada, all that nonsense. But
I don't know about what Steven's intentions were, but I can tell you right now that in that video, the phrasing and the articles and the citations that he uses all essentially point to trans women being men, which we aren't. And I think that the effect that that video gives off is
double
really just like adding panic to like trans people competing alongside cis women.
Yeah, basically.
And I think that as Mrs. Snarky said in the chat earlier, that Philosophy Tube's video on transphobia, he goes into a lot of deep philosophical and scientific arguments for why trans women are women and likewise trans men are men. That goes much more in depth than I think rationality rules would ever go.
Yeah, and as we'll see later on, he doesn't I don't know how much research he did, but he seems to just take all of Noel Plum's arguments, which to me it doesn't really speak well to free thinking.
It also seems counterintuitive. You're discussing whether trans women should have a place inside the cis women sport league. Why are you bringing up the subject of men anyway? It seems counterintuitive to me.
Yeah, and that's what I noted earlier, is that it is very counterintuitive unless you're trying to create some sort of, or responding to some sort of gender panic, which is a more technical term for basically, we're scared of X happening to some sort of gender why, like men ruining women's sports and whatnot. Yeah. All right, let's continue.
Discussing the differences between cis women and cis men.
Now, this was, in my opinion, my biggest intellectual blunder. At the time, after explaining some of the reasons as to why men have an athletic advantage over women, I intended to show that while HRT evidently sufficiently reduces many of these advantages, such as hematocrit, it hasn't been shown to sufficiently reduce many other advantages, such as height, width,
Pause.
limb.
So here's the other thing when it comes to, especially if this were like presented to me to like a teacher in our sociology department, this would have been well, one, it would have been ripped to shreds, obviously, but just his whole approach, like, what does sufficient even mean? Like, do they have to get it within a certain statistical level? Do they have to? I mean, it's just an undefined term. Really.
Well, he does say here, by sufficient, I mean within the typical range of non-trans female athletes. That's what it says in the video.
Okay, the video might be a little bit delayed for me. Even that, though, you still run into the problems of, well, what if it's not the typical female athlete? Do we exclude those female athletes? It's the same problem that I mentioned earlier, that whatever caps you apply to trans women, you also have to apply to cis women.
Because of course, all women are all women, and so this is yet another sort of arbitrary definition that Rationality Rules is imposing, and I agree with Callan that that sex is just one, as well as these other attributes are just many benchmarks that could be used for anything. Again, it's rather arbitrary.
There are many attributes that need to be taken into account when determining a person's sex, and most of them are completely arbitrary and have no effect on how one's body would function in an athletic circumstance at all.
Exactly. Speaking of which, how much of a degree, I wonder, does Rationality Rules even have in sports medicine? But that's beside the point. His credentials aren't up for debate.
Also, I'm going to just give a shout out to Maddie in the chat, who just said that how does hormone change your height?
Yeah.
To be completely fair, it's theoretically possible. Very small measurements, because of the muscle mass that it can change. It can affect how much there is on the bottom of your feet, and that can make a millimeter of bones difference.
Sounds sufficient.
You get that reference.
All right, so shall we
muscle
continue?
fiber type, heart size, lung capacity, and muscle fiber. The problem, of course, is that I somehow failed to include the second part, and consequently, yeah, I damn messed up. I equivocated trans women with non-trans men, and that's a huge mistake that could have been fixed with just a paragraph or two. Another
Well,
of my
at least you
intellectual
admits it.
True.
mistakes refers to hemoglobin.
Did you get that, you unrehearsed emotional college students? Hemoglobin is the #1 advantage cis men have over cis women. Well, this is awkward. You see, this is what happens when you attempt a bait and switch, using studies comparing cis women to cis men, rather than cis women to trans women on HRT. You end up talking a load of pure bollocks about hemoglobin being the greatest source of trans woman advantage, only to then discover that hemoglobin counts of trans women are the same as...
Okay, we all know that trans women blood is special. We bottle it up and we put it in jars. It's sacred.
It's like Phoenix Tears. It'll automatically heal anyone.
That's why.
And it's the secret to immortality too.
I mean, I haven't died yet, and I have trans blood flowing through me.
See, so clearly you're living proof. We should all take Via's blood.
So we should all become vampires then, I presume.
Best argument for vampirism I ever heard came from Rationality Rules.
Those of cis women.
Indeed, my views on hemoglobin were mistaken. You see, I had read a few studies which compared the mean hemoglobin levels of trans women to non-trans women, which indeed are significantly higher. But what those studies didn't make clear...
Did he cite those studies?
He is showing the graph on screen, but I don't think he actually linked the studies. I'm not 100% sure on that.
Okay, that's a blunder.
This reeks of Carl Benjamin's videos about feminism, where he doesn't really read studies or links to them. I highly recommend watching an entire series by H. Bomber Guy detailing that. I feel like this is something that is very apparent here. And whatever you think of Ethel's videos, whether she may get things right or wrong, I think it's really good to see that she does link every source that she uses for her videos in the description so that everyone can research them on their own time to just learn more about the subject at hand.
All right, sounds good. Let's continue learning about how we should all take Via's blood.
Now know is that while the average trans woman on HRT has greater hemoglobin in their blood than the average non-trans woman, it's still within the typical range of the latter. In hindsight, I should have focused on the aforementioned athletic advantages of muscle mass, height, and muscle fiber type, as HRT doesn't...
Pause it here. So Via, you want to tell us about the advantages of muscle mass?
Well, it completely depends on the sport whether there's an advantage or not, because in something like weightlifting...
I'm also just talking about like the just sort of the transition in the loss of muscle mass that you have to keep working out and whatnot, otherwise you'll become a noodle.
Oh yeah, I got you. Before I started on hormones, like, I had some pretty good muscle mass, and pretty quickly after, I've noticeably had to work way more to keep that same muscle mass, especially after having started on HRT for the second time after taking a break for medical reasons. I've put on like lots of weight since going back on hormones. And admittedly, I'm not working out as much as I should be, but I'm also working out the same amount that I was before I went back on the hormones.
Yeah, so the effect that the hormones had is sufficient.
Also, just like to add that that muscle may not necessarily be the defining factor in winning some sports events, like in wrestling. I did a wrestling class yesterday, and I was told that it is less about the muscle and more about the structure. So it's just way more nuanced than just simple mass of muscle.
Yeah, I'm not too experienced. I'm not too versed in a bunch of different sports, but in the sports that I know about, muscle mass either completely isn't a necessary factor, or it's one among like many, many other factors that other factors maybe cis women would have an advantage in, or something there would be something that trans women would have an advantage in, but less of an advantage. And really, there's no clear way to say which, whether the average trans woman or the average cis woman would be more versed in a sport just because of the muscle mass that they have.
The other thing we learned is that if you're going to cannibalize someone, don't cannibalize them while they are still on HRT because of the reduced muscle mass.
But what
I don't know.
about
Muscles are a bit tough to bite into.
yeah, but what about the illustrious trans blood?
That, we can never forget that. You must drain all trans people of their blood. That's just the fact of life. That's how we keep the human race going.
I'm gonna make a cake with my own.
It'll be a cake of immortality.
These advantages down to the typical range.
There's also another trick at play here. By focusing on the typical range of testosterone whilst discussing national and international level sports, you are implicitly claiming that women at such sporting events as the Olympics are representative of the typical woman.
This is also a fair criticism. I should have emphasised that while female athletes have, with very few exceptions, testosterone levels within the typical range of non-athletes, they do tend to sit on the higher part of that range. Though, and this might surprise you, as it did me, the opposite is true of endurance athletes. Research shows that circulating levels of testosterone, or current levels of testosterone, vary significantly from one athletic event to another. In explosive events, such as sprinting, swimming, cycling,
they vary from one athletic to another event. It's almost like they're different people, isn't it? Like, there's variation.
That's bullshit. Individuality is a lie taught to you by the liberal agenda or whatever.
Oh, that's right. It's by the postmodern Marxist agenda. Get your agendas right.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing. It's all controlled by the Illuminati.
Yeah, which is oh wait, I'm not going to go that route. No, I won't go there. Anyhow, let's continue.
Now you make me very curious.
kayaking, and speed skating, test levels are on the high end of the female range. But in endurance events, such as long and middle distance running, test levels are on the low end. And that's one of the reasons why the scientific community frequently notes that circulating testosterone isn't the be-all and end-all. It seems that just as fast-twitch muscle fibers are critical in some sports, but negligible in others, the same is true of circulating testosterone.
My God! It's almost like sports are different. That they're not all the same. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
It's evidently less what one's current levels are and more what one's previous elevated levels have given them. So there's the mistakes that I made, or at least the majority of them. I'm now going to move on to Ethel's mistakes, but don't let that dampen mine. I screwed up, and I own that fact. While I
And you're
reject
still
the malice,
screwing up.
And he isn't really owning that he screwed up very much.
No, I am missing some of that as well. And now this seems to go on about whataboutism, basically.
It does, really. Granted, this video is bad, but what he should have done is split it up. If he wants to attack Essence of Font, fine, do it in a separate video. But if you want to make up for your mistakes, that needs to be its own thing. It's almost like saying, yeah, I was wrong about this and I was a horrible person about this, but, which doesn't look good at all.
Yeah, I think that Ethel made a lot of mistakes in dealing with this situation, especially with how aggressive they've been. But at the same time, attacking the person who's criticizing you in a video where you're trying to correct yourself, or where you're saying that you're trying to correct yourself at least, is a horrible idea, and it shifts the blame and the, for lack of a better word, vitriol toward someone else.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just not virtuous.
And I think it should be noted that all of this stemmed from Rationality Rules video. Nothing else. He just made a really ignorant, piss poor attempt at discussing this issue.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
absolutely. I mean, we had it earlier with somebody else that it was "I'm sorry, but," and that just doesn't work. I'm sorry, but it doesn't work.
It's like saying, I'm sorry that you think I'm wrong, but I'm actually right. It's not an apology at all. It's just trying to rub it in someone's face that you think that you're right and that they're basically worth shit to you.
Yep. So now we move on. Oh wait, except we need more of Bia's blood.
Oh, hey, Ocean's in the chat.
Ocean, you need trans blood.
Illustrious trans blood.
There's nothing like it. It will cure everything. It'll fix all your problems.
Motive that some have attributed to me, I absolutely recognise that my honest mistakes caused real harm, and I am sincerely sorry for that.
Do you though? That's the thing. I don't see it here. I really don't. Not with the whataboutism and the earlier screw ups that we've mentioned. There's plenty of literature. Heck, I even sent him the paper doing gender. He could have asked me for sociological literature concerning the subject, but he didn't.
There are legitimately thousands, if not millions, of trans people on the internet who are plenty versed in this subject, and I doubt that he really went to any of them at all.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the term cisplaining, some people may hate that, but that's like exactly what's going on here.
And I hate to be the person who says, oh, he's a cis white male, he doesn't know how tough it is for us. But, like, to be fair, he legitimately doesn't. He has no idea how it's affected, like, the trans community and how it's distanced us from, like, lots of the secular
From everything.
community.
Yeah. Especially with us, we have being trans and pagan. It's not like we don't.
Yeah,
it's
and
not
I
like
know
people coming after us to begin with. Now we have this to deal with.
lots and lots of trans, like, atheists and probably pagans too. At least, I know that you've definitely gotten a ton of backlash, Callan. Almost every trans person I've followed and seen on Twitter has been getting, like, attacks from either Stevens fans or people in the atheist community who just don't know what they're talking about because their only person that they see talking about this subject is Rationality Rules.
Yeah, and for as rational as a lot of these atheists like to pretend they are, none of them are at all versed on like the literature. They don't like Gender and Society is a major sociological publication, equivalent almost to like that of Nature for like say physics. Yet I doubt any of them have heard of it or would even care to hear it because, well, they deny social science. And this is what we get.
Yeah, apparently social science is all just Marxist conspiracy.
Yeah, we're just a bunch of libtards. Yeah, that's something.
Admittedly, I'm not very versed on the social sciences side of this, and I know what I do mostly from personal experience and how it's affected me. But at the same time, there's information right there, right in front of you, and all you really have to do is like Google it, and I'm sure it'll be like one of the top 5 results that comes up.
Exactly. Like it took Acer Pagan, he's not. I don't think he's in the chat with us right at the moment. But it took him literally one Google search to pull up a paper which showed that trans athletes generally tend to be treated unfairly among
Spoiler alert, but there might be a bit of foreshadowing about this later on with regards to Dusty Smith.
The original
fun.
video is now delisted, and I've donated all of the ad revenue that it made to the transgender charity Sparkle. I know that it will never make up for the harm that I've caused, and that many of you will never consider me an ally again. I understand.
All right, pause it here. Simply put, if you're being this ignorant and unknowing about trans issues, you're not an ally. In terms of, I know a lot of people will probably hate me for saying that, but if you want to be like an ally and be sort of an activist, you need to do your research. It's not easy standing with us, nor should it be. It's a struggle.
Well, to be honest, it should be easy. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any real reason, in my opinion, that it should be hard. Why should it be? It isn't easy, but I think, to be fair, it should be.
Because the opposition is not easy, I guess I should say. I mean, yeah, I guess in an ideal world, sure, it should be easy, but at the same point, considering what we have to go up against, it's not easy. You better have your facts on board. And with this amount of research and spreading this amount of ignorance, you do not stand with us spreading this nonsense. You stand against us in a way.
After the last video, I thought that he legitimately could have just made a mistake and that he was willing to fix it. But now that I've seen this, I would not be I wouldn't ever be able to consider myself a friend or even a decent acquaintance with him, just because of the misinformation that he's spreading and the violence that he's probably not intentionally, but that he's still promoting toward us.
He's and Garth.
I wasn't even really all that aware of rationality rules because I'm not really that into the YouTube atheist thing anymore. So it's just, this guy's just not very good.
All right, so forward with the monstrosity. Oh, and we need
So the
more.
first-
We need more trans blood too, via Philip LeBol.
Gladly.
Illustrious trans blood.
First of Ethel's objections that I'd like to respond to refers to the fact that trans women don't always win.
What's interesting about the Rachel McKinnon case is the fact that the person responsible for attacking her, Wagner Asali, who came third, beat McKinnon in 10 out of 12 previous events. And not only did Asali fail to raise issue during those times, but apparently those 10 times can be ignored since McKinnon won the 2018 UCI Track Championship. The implication here being that a trans woman competing isn't a problem, just so long as she never wins.
Ethel went on to make the same point about Laurel Hubbard.
Whilst Hubbard holds the snatch record, she does not hold the clean and jerk record or the total record for her category.
And also in regards to Hannah Mouncey.
Also, she's been on the losing team before, so it's not like her presence guarantees victory.
Now, the problem with this objection is that it completely misses the point. If one has an unfair advantage but loses, they still had an unfair advantage.
All right, pause it here. This is the other thing that kind of ticks me off, because no matter what, if you set that bar like that, then there's nothing we can do to not have really an unfair advantage because of how arbitrarily defined being fair is.
Yeah, not only that, but he seems like there are, even within the cis women category, there are people that have advantages based upon their body features. It's why does it matter where those advantages come from?
The
Yeah,
whole
I
point
know.
is that it's a contradiction, actually, because sports is about competing biologically, supposedly. Well, you're just starting to put a cap again on women's. Now you've also set a barrier for cis women.
Also, I like how rationality rules completely disregards any kind of empiricism because he totally just discounts the entire thing of past runs playing any part in determining if someone has an actual advantage or not.
Yeah, good point. And when he says that close enough, well, okay, I shouldn't spoil it. I mean, not that I think anyone who's in the chat hasn't seen the video, but
Fairness, which is the foundation of sports and athletics, isn't about who crosses the line first. It's about ensuring
pause
that
it
all
now.
participants.
The point of
Oh
sports
boy.
isn't fair. The point of sports is for entertainment.
And
If-
For
competing.
entertainment and pushing one's body to the absolute limit that they possibly can. And either way, there are going to be like bodily modifications that you can make to be like absolutely extreme athletically. And that goes for whether you're a trans woman or a cis woman. So I think really my biggest problem with this entire video is that we're being discriminated against for features that we have, but the cis women who also have those exact same features are still allowed to compete in their gender category.
Exactly, and that's what I keep on saying, and that's what ultimately sort of defeats his whole argument, is that now you're looking at saying, all right, no woman is allowed to be this strong or this fast. Period. Any who are get put into a special category. Why? Just because it can't be unfair. And when you start looking at it like that, well, that's just plain sexist. Because what about the men? You have to look at the men too. And so on and so on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And not only that, but I mean, with boxing, for example, to just take a random example again, you have weight categories. There, we are actually separating different categories based on an actual bodily feature that is important, that actually makes a difference. I don't see what the problem is with this.
The problem is feels, we gotta have that gender panic. That's the problem.
Yeah, again, I don't know about Steven's intentions, but I do know what is coming of this video, and what it is trans women are being attacked online like constantly, and essentially people are panicking over the apocalypse of women's sports when it's been years since we were first allowed to compete in sports with other women, and nothing of the sort has happened, and it doesn't appear that it will anytime soon.
They just simply haven't accepted the truth of the valuableness of the valuability of trans blood.
Yeah, that. But also, is a question I've had throughout this entire drama is, I don't think Rationality Rules actually cares about, or doesn't seem to care that much about women's sports because it just seems like he's just using this as just some kind of dressing over the ignorant positions he holds. I mean, of all the things, why women's sports specifically?
Because women need to be protected. This is where the sexism comes in.
Yeah, women are just so vulnerable. We just can't protect ourselves at all. Oh, I mean, sorry, not we, because obviously trans women aren't women at all.
No, apparently not anymore. They're just they're men with magic blood.
Obviously.
From the same starting block. If I ran a marathon against Mo Farah and was given a 30-minute advantage, he'd still easily beat me, but I'd still have had a significant unfair advantage. Hence,
Pause. So this is where the dog whistling comes in. It's like, he still beat you, and yet you're still complaining that you got an advantage. I mean, what? Why are you even... It's just... The whole thing is gender panic.
I can see his point in that. In his case, for example, he says, "Well, I would still lose," but let's say you then have the situation where the finish would be close. Would it start to matter at that point?
I mean, overall, I don't think not really, because I also think his analogy is stupid. No one is giving trans women a 30-yard advantage.
What this insinuates to me is that he's saying no matter how what's the word? Reliably, that's it. No matter how reliably trans women could come in like way behind cis women in sports every single time, even in that case, he would still have the same objection against us being allowed to compete with cis women.
the question is whether or not McKinnon, Hubbard, Mountsie, and other trans women who have experienced male puberty still retain any of the athletic advantages that they receive from said male
Pause
puberty.
that. Yeah, no, that's not the question. That question is irrelevant until you can provide statistical data that shows it has some sort of effect. And even if you can at this point, it really wouldn't matter. I would probably go so far as to say that, because it refers back to the other earlier argument of, again, you're hamstringing women, cis women and trans women. Because you're saying a cis woman cannot be this good. And in fact, this is what currently, what's her name? Semenya is fighting in Switzerland. With her, they're trying to force her to take hormones to reduce how good of a runner she is.
Yeah, I did hear something along those lines. I'm taking, is she trans or cis?
She's cis.
At that point, I mean, we're talking about competing with each other. How is that fair?
It's not. It's really just sexist. I mean, there's no other real way to put it. You're making implicit assumptions about women at that point that are unfounded.
Basically, it's unnatural for a woman to be able to run so fast, so let's slow her down. That's basically what I'm hearing.
Oh my, I'm shocked. We actually have 20 people in here.
By the way, Kellen, someone's asking your preferred pronouns in the chat.
They, them, or she.
And if they do, whether or not they constitute a to greater advantage in the specific events that they desire to compete in. At elite level athletics, in most events, the difference between first and second place is less than 1%. I'll say that again as it's absolutely critical. In most events, the difference.
It's not critical, though. In fact, it's completely irrelevant because the changes that you're proposing wouldn't just affect elite athletics. Not even the changes, but the arguments that you're making don't just affect elite athletics. They affect every athlete. I don't see how he cannot see this.
It does seem a bit like he's trying to argue for restrictions globally for a very local issue. If
Local
that's a right analogy.
This is actually somewhat making me think of, and this is going to sound kind of weird or off topic, but it reminds me of something that I read in Aristotle's Politics, where he argues that laws should be made for a general public and not definitive sort of specific groups, because then you end up kind of like with this situation. It seems like rationality rules is really trying to use this very general sort of broad brush thing.
Yeah, that's what he's. It's also why I don't know. Does it approach hasty generalization fallacy? Or no, not that. Never mind. Maybe I'll think of it later. Anyhow, let's drink more. Let's drink more of Via's blood and continue.
And second place is statistically less than 1%, and so any retained advantages that are not mitigated by other disadvantages is simply too much. To quote Noel Plum, who recently released an absolutely brilliant video on
Pause this. So I've dealt with Noel Plum in arguments. He's an absolute idiot. In fact, Esokian even said he doesn't even know how HRT works. He's a case of Dunning-Kruger, pretty much.
I legitimately snorted when I first heard him say that he enjoyed his video.
Subject.
In sport, when it comes to performance enhancement, close enough is not close enough.
And this brings us...
Pause that. Except close enough is close enough in this case because it equals non-distinction.
And close enough literally means close enough. Like, by definition, it is itself close enough.
Yeah, because when you start saying, oh, close enough isn't good enough, well, okay, should we start looking at the differences between various cis women and start creating like thousands of different leagues or categories because of all these little different advantages they have? No, that's absurd. Really, what we should do is just give them all a dose of trans blood, and that will be the equalizer.
Illustrious trans blood.
Comfortably to the burden of proof and where exactly it lies.
Woodford needs to do 3 things. First, he needs to show which of these traits survive the HRT process and to which degree. Second, he needs to demonstrate superior performance on part of trans women on HRT. Third, he needs to demonstrate a causal relation leading from point 1 to point 2. Without that, he has nothing.
Actually, no. The burden of proof is
Pause
on
that.
you.
Okay, so using the burden of proof to get yourself out of having to make a point is really weak. It shows that you don't know what the hell you're talking about and that you're just trying to pass it off to your other interlocutor because you're too lazy in this case.
I see what you mean. I can also see his side of the argument, as in you need to demonstrate that the average advantage is
Actually,
offset. Sorry, go ahead.
Actually, it is a lot like folkism and the race realism conversation in a lot of ways. And he's exactly right, because race is a social construct, just like gender. So would I go so far as to say that they're pretty much the same? I'm actually coming closer to that point. Saying that gender is somehow biological is, yeah, equivalent to saying that race is somehow biological.
Well, there are certain sports that are dominated basically by certain nationalities.
Yeah, but that's out of training.
And that's
True.
also a cultural thing, because certain cultures just generally do some sports rather than others.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to, be the best ice skater in the world when you come from Ecuador.
Yeah, that's why you don't see a lot of people from sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia in the Winter Olympics.
There's a reason the Jamaican bobsled team is like such a meme. I mean, they're a great team, and I don't mean that they're a meme and that they're bad. It's just a joke that they're able to compete at all when they're from Jamaica.
The Cubans, yeah, or the Ecuadorian bobsledding team, a little country that's on the freaking equator. Oh boy! All right, continue.
Us, and here's why. Given that in most events men outperform women by 10 to 30%, we need to show that HRT completely removes, or at least sufficiently mitigates, the athletic advantages granted by male puberty.
Pause that. No, we don't, because it's irrelevant. Unless you want to create just a gender panic. It really, truly is irrelevant, because you can have intersex variations in which cis women have the same advantages. Are you going to now bar them? Are you going to put a cap on women's performance? It's absurd. No.
Until we do that, we are not justified in claiming that fairness has been achieved. Now, thanks to Joanna Harper, and this is another thing that I'll elaborate on within my upcoming video, I'm currently convinced that when it comes to long and middle distance running, the burden either has been met or it's close to being met, since in these events they rely very heavily on hemoglobin, and HRT does indeed lower hemoglobin.
That trans blood, I'm telling you. You gotta get some of that. It's just so
Yeah, no
magical.
kidding.
Trans blood is the blood of life. It's the sacred blood of the gods. That's how the gods sustain themselves, Totally. Trans blood.
To the appropriate level. But in other events, and especially those which pivot on such things as height, frame, and fast twitch muscle fibers, the burden not only hasn't been met, it's heavier than it's ever been before.
Pause. So, who wants to go ahead and tell short people that they now have a league of their own in basketball?
Sorry.
Yeah,
what-
as far as I'm aware, there isn't a specific basketball league for people under the height of 5'6".
Yeah, I don't recall that either. Usually they just simply say tough luck. Why isn't he campaigning for those rights?
But how?
What about the short people?
Yeah, but how short is short enough?
Look, we don't think about details like that. It's just we want to attack trans people.
I guess. I see.
And we want to create a gender panic. Those other details are irrelevant. The fact that we should basically equivalently be going out there and campaigning for the rights of short people to have their own league. Never mind what short is a secondary issue. Not even a secondary. It's just a non-issue, because men only matter anyway.
I really wanted to play basketball when I was younger. And basically, I am rather short, and I just could not compete. It's that simple. Not. And how is that any different?
I believe the shortest player in NBA history was 5'2", I think. Either 5'2" or 5'4".
Well, when I say I cannot compete, I mean I just can't defeat larger players, basically, no matter what I did.
And that is not, and that does not have to do with your gender at all. It just has to do with your physical physique and your height and your strength and your endurance. So
Your genes.
Yeah, exactly. It does not have anything to do with my gender. I mean, I am shorter than average here, and by a lot. I mean, the Netherlands isn't called the land of giants for no reason.
It is the land of swamp Germans.
I was just about to say that, Callum.
The land of swamp Germans, where they speak swamp German. Swamp German, yeah. Alright, go on.
Which is to say that the evidence is overwhelmingly to the contrary. Again, I'll elucidate on this and the burden of proof in detail in the future, but I feel compelled to give the short of it now since it's certainly relevant.
Okay, pause it. The fact that he cares more about the burden of proof than about what his words and his arguments are doing to trans people is disconcerting.
Yeah, this is one of the few examples in which I think science is a better determinant than philosophy when regards to how to treat people, because instead of treating people like people, we and determining context, we think of things or rationality rules would rather think of things solely in the terms of sort of logical arguments, which may not necessarily correspond with reality.
The funny thing is, I was watching a video of his earlier today in which he specifically stated that he would put the welfare of others above the truth. He's not doing that here.
Oh,
in
no,
no way, shape, or form.
No, he's screwing up, which is, yeah. Sadly, that's the thing.
Yeah, it seems to me that he just prefers.
I think the philosophy and the science here are pretty much on complete agreement. There is no philosophical way you could justify other than transphobia.
I understand that. I think I just sort of misspoke. I think I was just sort of thinking about just argumentation without any context. Yeah.
Yeah, you mean debate, not philosophy debate.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, basically, I misspoke there.
Yeah, all right.
So, let's get to Ethel's next objection.
Miller beat Seoul by 0.37 seconds, yet Miller's own time was still 0.35 seconds slower than the current women's record, which stands at 6.65 seconds. Does that then mean that cis women have clear advantage over trans women?
This criticism, of course, relates to trans women not always winning, and it suffers from all the same flaws. If one has an unfair advantage...
Which are no flaws at all.
No, I don't really see it.
No flaws.
I don't really see it. I mean, the argument is an unfair advantage is unfair. All right. But at what point, what are we using as criteria for something being an unfair advantage? Where does that bar lie?
It lies in the fact that I'm not comfortable with trans people, and trans people are icky and they have this magic blood, so therefore they shouldn't compete.
Yeah, and that it's all in the trans blood.
That
But-
trans blood, you can't get enough of it. I swear. We should produce more trans people just for their blood.
Oh, maybe that's why I have to get my blood tested every 3 months for my hormones.
Totally. Yep.
They're
we're
actually just
taking-
taking it for medicinal purposes.
Exactly, and that's why everyone but you will live forever.
I like how Mrs. Snarky put it. So I guess we should just consider the exception and ignore the rule. That basically sums it up in my view.
Yeah, it does. Oh, I just can't.
So
I
thank you,
mean, here-
Mrs. Snarky.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks to everyone who so far is come in.
Losers,
Got
they
it.
still had an unfair
We got
advantage.
Ocean on the blood train now. Oh yeah, my blood. That's right. I'm trans. Yeah, I haven't transitioned, so to speak. I'm still sort of on the fence. I need to go to gender counseling for that. But yeah, my blood's good too.
So we just need to isolate Via in that instance.
Totally.
Now you make me curious. You are gender fluid, right?
Yes.
So would you still consider a transition?
I'm on the fence about it. There are some parts of my body that I don't like, but I won't go into because I generally do not like giving up my sex. But yeah, that's what I'll say.
Callan, I'm just wondering if you could. I'm not sure if you can afford this, but I watched the most recent ContraPoints video where she goes through sort of her journey with plastic surgery to make her face feel more feminine to better align with her gender orientation.
I wish I could, but this is North Carolina, and our
Oh,
health insurance sucks.
I see.
Yeah,
Advantage.
and yes,
Yes.
Ocean, it still does count. That means
Due to hate-
Ocean's going to drive up here from Georgia and suck my blood.
HRT.
So Ocean is a barbarian, a wizard, a necromancer, and a vampire.
And a blood
Yeah,
magician.
Blood magic, yeah. But that's totally a thing, actually. It actually is. Though I don't practice it.
This testosterone is likely now within the range of non-trans women, and because of this, some of the benefits that she received from male puberty are now mitigated, such as circulating hemoglobin. But other benefits haven't been, such as muscle mass. Now don't get me wrong, HRT reduces muscle mass by over half, but to again quote Null,
Pause it. I like how he just says just by a half, and then just sort of leaves that in there as if all halves of muscle mass are equal.
Yeah, that does seem a bit not expanded upon enough.
Like, if you took half of my muscle mass, I would literally probably not be able to really move my arms. Just saying.
And I'm pretty sure that the average cis woman has more than half the muscle mass of the average trans person who's not on HRT.
Yeah. But yeah,
Enough.
so there's another question at rationality rules. Rationality drools at this point. Continues to. Needs to back up. Alright, so continue.
Cutting whole is what it has to be. You need to go all the way or have some mitigating factors that will counteract it for it to count. But cutting half, it's not close enough. Close enough is never close enough when it comes to a performance advantage, an unfair performance advantage in sport.
Yeah, I feel like covering that is pretty much beating a dead horse. It's just so ridiculous.
Yeah, he does seem to be on repeat a little bit.
He seems like a clown. almost here. It would be funny if it weren't if the issue weren't so serious.
It's almost like he doesn't have the knowledge to properly address the topic, so he keeps repeating the same vague things over and over again.
Yeah, something I think
Kind of
that,
like a creationist, actually.
yeah, something that I think people need to do more often is just understand what they know and what they don't know.
Well, you
So-
remember about Socrates, right?
Yeah, I know nothing.
He wasn't the wisest. He wasn't the wisest in the world because he knew everything. He was the wisest in the world because he knew what he did not know.
Yes.
Okay, so now I'd like to respond to the most frequent criticism that I've received. That being that trans women have been able to compete since 2004, and yet they haven't come to dominate. Ethel and many others see this as strong evidence for trans women not having an advantage whatsoever.
And to that end, I'd just like to note the fact that the Olympics has allowed trans women to compete since 2004. That's 15 years of trans women being allowed to compete at the Olympic level. And in spite of all of this, trans women have not come to dominate said games. Again, we have 15 years of trans women being allowed to compete in female categories at the Olympics. Yet we have absolutely no evidence of what you claim will happen unless we act quickly.
Yes, trans athletes have been able to compete since 2004, but up until 2015, and effectively 2016, the rules were drastically different. Until 2015, trans women had to 1. Be legally recognised as a woman, which of course was near impossible for those living in countries in which changing one's gender is illegal.
That also seems rather irrelevant to me.
It's very irrelevant, and I don't. If anything, it just shows the failure of those countries. It doesn't speak to trans women in sports at all.
Yeah, and I think that this is yet another example of rationality rules ditching the idea of empiricism with regards to understanding if trans women actually have a definitive advantage, and if they haven't had, if it hasn't been shown that they've had that much an advantage in 15 years, then I don't really see the issue in arguing the opposite if the opposite is not true.
Well,
Yeah,
basically,
exactly.
what he's trying to do right now, in my view, is try to argue that there isn't any empirical evidence yet because of those rules, that they were too limiting for the first, 10 years or something along those lines. And that as such, they shouldn't count for reasons.
But again, this is yet another example of him putting an arbitrary benchmark as to what is enough, and I'm not entirely sure what the benchmark should be, if there should be a benchmark. This just seemed, I mean, I just think that if experience shows that it isn't that big of an issue, then just no.
Yeah,
They had-
it's a non sequitur. That's pretty much the way you can sum it up. It's like, so what? You still have countries where it's still a problem. You're not going to see a trans athlete in the Saudi Arabian Olympic team.
And also in just the countries that have allowed trans people to change their legal gender marker, there would still be plenty of a sample base of trans women just in those countries who, by Stephen's logic, would be completely able to just dominate the game and wreck the entire women's category.
I'm curious. I wanted to look this up, but I didn't have the time with everything. But how many trans women have competed? Is that something we know?
That's a good question. Actually, I should research that. Not sure. Have to get back to you on that. But regardless, I think we can all conclude that this is a non sequitur that he brought up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It just the moment, for example, that the rules were so restrictive that only one person has ever been able to meet them in those 10 years, then it becomes slightly a valid argument in that it's not enough of a data sample size, basically. But the moment we're talking about, say, hundreds or whatever, then we're talking about a sufficiently sized sample size. So that's why I asked.
Maddie just brought up a really good point in the chat. I don't know if I can say it enough. This guy thinks Noel Plum is smart.
Yeah, that in itself is a pretty damning thing, especially from a trans perspective.
In addition to rationality rules, I don't really know that much about Noel Plum. I've heard his name for a while, but I just don't really know him. So,
well, I'm sorry, but you're about to learn more of him. I'm truly sorry for this, but we don't have health insurance either, so keep that in mind when you hear him.
You're gonna learn a lot more about Noel. I can't even say his name. Noel Plum than you'll ever want to.
To have undergone gender reassignment surgery, which is to say they had to have removed their testicles. And 3, they had to have received appropriate hormone therapy for at least 2 years. Now, this might not sound like a huge change from today's rules of 1, non-legally identifying as a woman, and 2, having testosterone levels below 10 nanomoles per litre for 12 months, but it is. While our...
Is it?
I was just about... He really seems to be going for the argument, well, there weren't that many in the past, now there are, and that's a problem. That seems to be his entire point.
Oh geez, that's really terrible reasoning.
And even then, it's been 3 years since the regulations have become less strict, and I still don't see trans women completely dominating the women's category.
It's because we're too busy taking all their blood.
Adrenal glands.
Yeah, it's those pesky doctors stealing all of our blood, and that's where our magic superpowers come from. So we just don't have the power to compete like cis women.
Exactly. See, rationality rules vindicated.
Very small amount of testosterone. The vast majority comes from our gonads, that being the ovaries in women and testes in men. Hence, without testicles, a trans woman can't produce anywhere near the 10 nanomole limit, and will almost entirely depend on exogenous testosterone to maintain sufficient levels. However, with testicles, a trans woman can simply reduce her HRT as to allow her testosterone to be much closer to the 10 nanomole limit. Now,
pause it. Look, he's advocating for genital mutilation.
That's one way.
I don't know about you, but it took me about a year to get down to the below 10 limit, and it just doesn't go back up and down that quickly that you can fluctuate it at will and avoid the medical tests.
Yeah, I think he skipped over that point, unfortunately. I'm just like, but I'm just kind of surprised he's advocating for genital mutilation. I mean, am I wrong there? I hope I'm wrong. I'm probably wrong.
No, it does sound that way. Like, if you want to actually compete, you're gonna have to cut them off. Oh, come on.
You might be thinking, wait, Steve, why are you so certain that such manipulation is likely to occur? Well, that's my next topic.
Woodford seems to be taking it as a given that since these are the limits for sport, that Most trans women in sport will aim to sit on the very edge or said limit. But how does that relate to reality? According to the guidelines put out by the International Planned Parenthood Federation, anti-androgens, also known as testosterone blockers, should be used to reduce the rates of testosterone in trans women's bodies to somewhere between 30 to 100 nanograms per deciliter, just above 3 nanomoles per liter, the typical range for a cis woman.
From here, Ethel goes on to cite recommendations from several other medical institutions to bolster her point.
None of which come anywhere near the 288 nanograms per deciliter, the 10 nanomoles per liter that Woodford is crying about.
And she concludes by reasoning that because of this, trans women are at a disadvantage in regards to testosterone.
In fact, many of the suggested targets cap trans women's testosterone levels at the lower end of a typical range for cis women. So if anyone is at a sporting disadvantage in regard to testosterone, it's most of trans women on HRT.
Now, to be honest, this objection is naive. The truth is that athletes have, and still do, sacrifice their health and safety in pursuit of their goals, as they know all too well.
So now we get to the part where he accuses us of not competing. What's the term I'm looking for? Of not being fair.
Honestly, you mean?
Basically, we cheat, therefore we have an unfair advantage. Kind of thing.
By the fucking god, he doesn't know a goddamn thing about how the hormones work.
What seems weird to me is they argue that he's going to stay at the upper limit, close to the limit as possible. That's basically his argument here. But then most of those limits are so far down that they are below the average level for a cis woman. And then he argues, well, but people sacrifice their health. Why is that even relevant in this particular argument?
Yeah, and also as Maddie just pointed out, he's like, well, if all people cheat, yeah, they will definitely cheat because all people will cheat. So yeah, where's the advantage anymore? I mean, why are we even having this discussion if people are all just going to cheat?
It does become a moot point at that.
Yeah, so it's not naive. It's assuming sort of it's assuming a base case, if you will, because the non-naive solution becomes irrelevant.
So I just have another question. Is Stephen Woodford just ignorant, or is he actually malicious? Because it just seems like he's just spouting just a load of bollocks.
I think he's... Go ahead, Cam.
Honestly, I think that it's mostly just implicit bias and that he's actually somewhat really ignorant. That might be me giving him too much charity, because I tend to like to give people as much charity as possible, so that way if they turn out to be bad, I can say, well, I gave them the rope to hang themselves on. I gave them every opportunity. But yeah, that's my opinion.
I like the old saying, never attribute to malice what can be sufficiently explained through incompetence. And it seems to me that that's what he's displaying here.
And I think that his implicit bias is affecting him majorly in the type of research that he's doing, because he's definitely cherry-picking small amounts of data, even when he does use data to support his claims.
Yeah, notice he hasn't cited a single trans person yet. It's like we don't exist. We're just there to be talked about.
Or that if they don't, they'll be outcompeted by those who do. Back when steroids were legal, and like today, not medically recommended, athletes happily admitted to taking them.
Steroids are taken 8 or 9, 10 weeks before competition. It's not a healthy thing to do, but it's being used.
Pause it. Okay, so even if I grant him this point, that doesn't say anything about trans athletes, because everyone's using steroids.
So, yeah, and from what I understood, it was before regulated, this particular instance.
Say again? Sorry? You cut out a little. Hello?
I'm here.
Did you take them?
All right, good.
I took them, yeah, up until the.
Rue, are you here?
Rua, are you here? Did we lose him?
We might have lost Rue.
See if he's on Twitter then. So, yeah. Everyone, this day is going well, I take it?
Yeah, my day's going pretty well.
Ruth says something just broke. Oh boy. Entertain them for a moment. So, yeah, my day was going well too. I mostly just went to the gym and then read my book for religious studies.
I haven't really done much today, other than play a bunch of CK2.
Can't argue with that. I want to play as the Norse again and then just conquer. So yeah, this video, as for it so puzzles me because we heard about how Rationality Rules kept on like researching, and he did this for months, and this is what he comes out with: stolen arguments from someone else that are as ignorant as heck. Sorry, Hal, I didn't mean to disparage your name there.
Yeah, I completely. Even when I did think that he was going to be doing his best to research, it still shouldn't have taken that long. And now that it has taken that long and he's put out the actual video, it's much more obvious that that small amount of research could have been done within like a couple days.
Yeah,
maybe a week or two at the absolute most, taking into account like some scheduling issues that he might have had.
Yeah, the other thing is I sent him decent documents about the whole thing. I provided him peer-reviewed research that has been cited over 12,000 times. You know, I mean, do people realize what it takes to get a paper cited like over 1,000 times?
Yeah, at this point he's just being ignorant and belligerent and not doing proper research.
And the thing is, I will happily help him in whatever research that he needs. I'm all for. I think that he has a huge audience, and if he were willing, I could provide him with whatever research he needs, and we could spread actual education about trans folks. But this isn't it. This is doing us harm. Yeah, and yes, Snarky, Plum didn't do anything really at all either. He's just, from what I've gathered, he tends to just think on the fly and make stuff up as he goes along. Just a bunch of ad-hocs.
Plum's just being a dick.
Pretty much.
Unfortunately, I'm not a trans person, so I'm not really able to understand as much as I would like to the violence and the vitriol that's been going on towards y'all, and I just wish I could understand this a bit better.
I'm happy that you don't. This is one of the things that a lot of people will say is that I wish I could feel that oppression. I really wish you don't. What we're more interested in are solutions and getting equal. The pain doesn't need to be experienced by everyone. I don't want you to have to go through what I have gone through.
We don't want people to understand the problems that we have. We want to make it so that we don't have worse problems than anyone else.
All right, sorry about that, people. My Discord completely froze.
Oh no! Did you drink some of that trans blood?
Yeah, that's why I'm back.
Ah, okay, good. Whose trans blood did you drink, by the way?
Oh, I have some in the storage. I ordered it online. It costs
okay.
a lot, by the way.
He just keeps some spare filled bodies in the basement in the wine cellar.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah. All right, so my apologies for that. Are we ready to continue?
Yes,
Yeah.
let us.
I'm ready.
I really should have gotten some alcohol.
Competition 8 or 9 weeks before competition, and it was something that everybody had to do in order to get an equal chance.
Is it playing?
It is, but the audio is gone here.
Oh, fun.
Sounds like you need to drink some more trans blood.
Yeah, I think
Athletes
he does
happily
too.
admitted to taking them.
Steroids are taken 8 or 9, 10 weeks before competition. It's not a healthy thing to do, but it's being used.
Did you take them?
I take them. I took them, yeah, up until the competition, 8 or 9 weeks before competition, and it was something that everybody had to do in order to get an equal chance to, to compete.
And even when steroids were banned, athletes did, and still do, everything they can to pass drug screening, despite the fact that they know that getting caught will likely end their career. Another more...
Okay, so again, relevance. If everyone's taking steroids, then it's pretty much as equal as the steroids are, so I don't see the relevance of this towards trans people.
Yeah, steroids are not necessarily gender specific. I'm not entirely sure about that.
Apparently, though, only trans people are allowed to take steroids. That's a fact I didn't know.
Is that just a euphemism for trans blood?
You know, I did wonder why the steroid market seemed to dramatically increase.
A recent example that comes to mind is MMA and the issue of testosterone replacement therapy. Long story short, institutions such as the UFC once allowed participants who had a prescription for TRT to compete. As a result, it has been suggested that participants took steroids to suppress their natural testosterone, and then, after their cycle, went to their doctor in the attempt and very often success of being prescribed TRT. They didn't care about their health, they cared about winning. Why? Because they're athletes, and that's what athletes do. They do what it takes to win.
Pause it. Okay, I'm not seeing anything here that affects trans people at all.
I think what he's trying to argue is that when you're on something like HRT, so hormone replacement therapy, that you can get your testosterone to such a low level that you can get testosterone replacement therapy, and then use that in order to up your testosterone to such a level that you have an unfair advantage. I think that's the argument he's trying to make. I don't see it as being valid, though.
That's the argument he's trying to make. That's even worse than I had assumed he was doing in this video.
Yeah, I'm trying to find something redeeming about him, but...
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what actual argument he's making at this point.
It's the only argument I can come up with, at least, with his story here. I don't see it as being valid. I mean, I can't imagine that that's not something that's possible as a cis women.
And this is the other thing that drives me nuts about these people. They don't include all the premises. They don't include a philosophic argument. If you're going to make an argument about human rights and about participation and whatnot, do it in a formal philosophical manner. Or don't do it at all. Preferably not do it at all. But if you have to, do it to where it's at least freaking valid. Don't have any missing premises here. Or don't have us asking, what's he trying to say? No, get down, employ the analytic method in philosophy and show us exactly what the heck you mean.
Yeah, I agree there. It's too much of a guessing game at this point. I mean, I can imagine that you would need to discuss it in such a format as this to at least explain it, but at least show the actual argument in its real form. It's too much of a guessing game at this point.
The point is,
He
athletes will.
basically debunks his own argument. Yeah, he does. It's just this is what we've been waiting for months. This is what we've been constantly attacked, and we're told that this great apology or something was going to come back, and this is what we get.
Yeah, from what
I expected better.
Yeah, as did I. From what I remember, his first his apology video came 3 weeks after the initial mistakes. From if I
I think it was a full month.
Yeah, because he went to Faithless Forum, which, I mean, it wouldn't. Honestly, these mistakes are completely like. He could have easily gained a lot of respect back if he had said, "Okay, look, I'm wrong. I didn't think these arguments fully through. Yeah, I fucked up. Here's what the actual case is, which is that ultimately there's no reason to not let trans women compete in sports. And if he had just left it at that, no problem. I can forgive and move on."
Also, he knew beforehand that this was going to be a controversial topic. I can't imagine that he did not knew that. So why do you time it in such a time? Come on. You know you're not going to be available for weeks, according to his story anyway. So why do you release a video of such a controversial nature that you cannot react to the feedback you get within a reasonable time frame? That's not a smart thing to do.
I mean, and as for having been gone for weeks, like, just ask Ocean. He wrote a bunch of new material for his channel while he was gone at Faithless Forum, and I'm sure that his schedule wasn't too much less booked than Woodford's was.
Yeah, there's just to say he fucked up is putting it very mildly. I'm also glad we don't have to worry about monetization.
Yeah, no kidding.
More often than not, operate at the very limits of what's permitted. And since the IOC, as of 2015, no longer requires trans women to undergo gender reassignment surgery to compete, and hence keep their testicles, hovering at around 8 to 9 nanomoles per litre is an extremely viable advantage for trans women to utilise. In fact, this is one of the primary reasons that Joanna Harper, among many others, are campaigning to reduce the level to 5 nanomoles per litre.
I am part of a committee that has recently recommended that we lower that limit from 10 to 5.
Now, what's a little odd to me is that in other areas, Ethel seemingly accepts this competitive inevitability.
The Olympics and similar national and international level sports are not a children's gym class. They are the pinnacle of human capability. Nations are willing to...
I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
I agree with, like we said earlier, with sports, we try to compete with each other, to drive each other to the best we can be. And I understand that you're going to want to be able to compete with each other in a level that you can say, well, we have basically equal opportunities. but I don't really know. It seems, I don't know.
Our previous arguments about this pretty much just apply the same. It's just bad.
Yeah, I agree. He seems to. It seems to be a bit of whataboutism, but I can see his point in that sometimes
Oh,
people
also,
seem to be
elite
arguing.
athletes are the only ones that are important. Just so you know.
What do
Not
you
the
mean? Sorry.
elite athletes, they're the only ones that are important. Like, he doesn't realize how his argument would be applied to everyone beneath elite athletes.
Yeah, that I absolutely agree with. His arguments seem to be very pointed towards a very specific circumstance, but then phrased in a way that needs to be applied on the entirety of sports, basically.
You pour millions of dollars into Olympic teams for the chance to win gold medals, and they'll do their research to figure out the easiest way to maximize that.
Indeed, they will, and they know that hovering at 8 to 9 nanomoles provides trans women with a massive advantage in many events.
Pause it. So why aren't there more trans women on the teams then?
Yeah, that does seem to be again a case of not looking at empirical evidence. And can I just say, I find it rather weird that he cut off Ethel's video right there. I would have loved to know what he had said after that.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I mean, maybe if someone in the chat could, like, snip this and then link us to, like, Essence of Thoughts original video so we could get the full context, because that really did not come off well.
It reeks of quote mining. It really reeks of quote mining.
Yeah.
Next objection I'd like to
Been
address.
better.
Yeah, you had something?
Sorry, I missed out on a bit of that. I was a bit tied up for a second.
Ah, okay, no, you're good.
Men typically having larger bodies than women.
But the presupposition that larger bodies benefits trans athletes is just that, a presupposition in need of evidence to back it up.
Yes, having a large body isn't an advantage in many events, such as equestrian and gymnastics, but in events such as weightlifting and hammer throw, to give just 2 examples, it very much is. In fact, the fact that men are on average taller and wider than women widely is recognized.
Does anyone else notice how damn vague his terminology is here? Like, larger bodies, what does that mean? Larger arms, larger legs, larger what?
Just being longer in general. It is too ambiguous.
Yeah, come on, people. If you're going to discuss these topics intellectually, wipe away the vagueness. Tell us exactly what you mean. Because otherwise, might as well, it reeks of paucity of thought.
This is one of the primary factors for the massive gap between them. And again, HRT doesn't sufficiently mitigate height and width. If Mountsie, for example, hadn't have experienced male puberty, she wouldn't be as tall and as wide as she is. Anyhow, the last objection I'm going to tackle is the most prominent study that Ethel referenced.
There is no direct and consistent research to suggest that transgender female individuals and transgender male individuals have an athletic advantage in sport, and therefore the majority of competitive sports policies are discriminatory against this population.
Indeed, this is the very study that many claim, including Dusty Smith, proves that trans women have no advantage.
Sports, medicine, trans. That's how easy this is to find. And okay, boom, the very first link that comes up, the most basic amount of research you could possibly fucking do, right? So why did he not share the most in-depth scientific study with his audience on the subject he is talking about? Instead, why did he show a Joe Rogan clip instead of sharing the science? Well, in my opinion, it's because the most in-depth study that is done on the subject goes against his narrative, and he doesn't want you to know that.
Now, I'm going to
Yeah,
thoroughly...
that's just flat out.
Yeah, it is. And I would like to take back to what he said just a little bit earlier. He said, if I don't know her name, but if she hadn't gone through male puberty,
Oh,
she wouldn't
also,
be as tall and wide as she is.
oh, also as objectively subjective. Sorry to interrupt. As they point out, that apparently that's a pre-transition picture that he keeps using. No, you don't do that.
That is dishonest as fuck.
Not only is
Sorry
that
to...
No, you can cuss here. That's fine. We don't give a fuck. That is not only dishonest, but that's like a violation of privacy. That's like asking a trans man, "Hey, what did you look like pre-transition?" Except you're doing it dishonestly.
Yeah, and that's the biggest problem here. I mean, if it's a public image, then I wouldn't be too upset about the fact that he used it, but use it in the right context. Don't use it in a way that makes it look as though HRT, the transition, didn't work. Or didn't, well, sorry, that's the wrong terminology, didn't have any effects on those attributes that he's talking about, which apparently...
Yeah, so what that makes me wonder is how much of that is his influence and how much of that was Noel Plum's influence. Because that does look like the exact kind of thing, knowing Noel Plum, that he would pull.
Yeah, but it was in a section of himself, so...
Oh yeah, no, that's still it's still dishonest as hell. That's not how. I have to get used to saying that. It's still as dishonest as heck.
But also, so you've gone through male puberty, and with male puberty, you have gotten a height of, say, 5 feet 6 inches, or something. Does that give you any... Is there any advantage at that point when you compete against a cis woman with a height of 5'6"? I mean, why does it matter how you got the height that you did?
I mean, ultimately it doesn't, because again, we don't segregate according to height.
So are we
Exactly.
supposed to segregate according to whether one hits a certain point in puberty in their lives? I mean, puberty is a
That's right.
general
If you have puberty
thing.
at 9, that's right. Based on the division that you participate, I can tell when you've now gone through puberty.
That's just ridiculous.
I mean, how would you even measure that? I mean, in order for benchmarks to be given,
Every parent now has to keep a log of when their child goes through puberty, which also means that all parents now also have to constantly keep examining their child naked in order to tell when they're going through puberty, because how else are we supposed to tell and make scientific measure?
But then people are gonna lie about it because they want to get an unfair advantage. You're gonna have to get it certified by an actual notary.
Therefore, trans women still have an advantage somehow. Yeah. See, we're getting stellar logic here.
We break down all of the relevant papers, including this one, in my future video. But to briefly address it now, let's go a step further than Dusty and do the most basic amount of reading. First off, If you read the title, you can see that it's a systemic review of the literature relating to sport participation and competitive sport policies, which is to say, it's not a review of athletic performance, a fact that the authors make
Pause.
even more.
You heard that, guys. Participating in a sport is not equivalent to athletic performance.
Yeah, this is one of the more confusing. Excuse me. This was one of the more confusing sections in the video because it assumes a kind of mutual exclusivity for the subject at hand, because rationality rules is basically making the assumption that it's targeting only performance rather than the athletic performance.
Yeah, it's
Also, he seems to want to actually measure. So he actually wants to measure the sports results, basically. So this is again a situation of, as long as they don't win, I'm all fine with it. But the moment they start winning, yeah, that's going to be a problem.
yeah, we're not allowed to win. We have to give our blood. So, does winning tank the blood? Do you know that, Bia?
I have no idea.
We have to figure out this cis agenda. It's just
clear in their objective. Scrolling down, if you read the method, you'll see that of the 8 studies that it references, 6 are interviews, with most having a sample size less than 5, and only 1 study actually relates to trans athletic performance, that being Goran and Bunk. And if you read their study, you'll see that, among other things, that while HRT significantly reduces muscle mass in trans women, it doesn't reduce it to anywhere near the same level as non-trans women. Anyhow, back to the systemic study, as from here things just get worse. The authors not only assert that...
That I can actually agree with rationality rules here. From here, things only get worse.
I have a theory, and I'm pretty sure that the reason that there hasn't been more studies done about trans people in sports is because it's not actually an issue, and the people who have the credentials to study that can easily see that there's no reason to study it, because it's not like we've completely dominated women's sports anyway.
Yeah, concussions are kind of a bit more important thing to study than this, because cerebral encephalitis, I think it is, causing increased aggression among football players, and that has actually resulted in some football players killing and committing murders and whatnot. That to me sounds like a bigger issue than trans women in sports, doesn't it?
Is that the technical medical definition or terminology of a concussion?
It's like repeated concussions over a very long period of time.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that makes sense for football players.
Yeah, also for boxer. Also, steroid use can lead to it, as in the case of Chris Benoit, who ended up actually killing his entire family.
There is no direct and consistent research to suggest that transgender female individuals and transgender male individuals have an athletic advantage in sport,
but also that there's no direct or consistent research to suggest that they have any advantage at any stage of their transition, e.g. cross-sex hormones and gender-confirming surgery. I'll say that again. Any stage. Which is to say...
Does that invalidate the research or something? Is that supposed to actually be an argument? I mean...
Also, why? I mean, he's being, so specific for a non-issue.
Yeah, not only that, but it sounds from the result, the study basically says, okay, trans women and cis women There is no athletic difference in whatever stage, right? So I'm starting to wonder, is there maybe then some more basic, not even that you don't even need HRT to actually compete with them on the same level? I mean, doesn't that get arbitrary at that point if there is no athletic difference?
I mean, ideally, no, you wouldn't. And this could be framed in a broader context of non-binary and gender fluid sports participation, which is a subject I have not done that much research on, actually, come to think of it. Need to get on that. I want to be on both the boys and the girls team.
I would have done research on non-binary people on sports, but there really isn't much, considering how being forced into one of two categories can draw people like that away from competing in sport.
Also, is there any difference physically between gender fluid, non-binary, and cisgendered people? I'm just wondering if there's any.
That's going to really depend on the. That's really going to depend on the non-binary person. Some do choose to have like some form of transition.
Okay.
Others do not.
Okay, I was just wondering as to what. I was just wondering that.
Yeah, here is where we get to the actual sort of muddier waters, so to speak, of where you could actually have a decent conversation. Not that Rationality Rules knows what that is at this point. Yeah, so how would you? Yeah, that's going to be a topic for another time, and I would need to do more research on that.
If your position is that trans women should be able to compete so long as they're on HRT, then you ain't getting it from this review. But yeah, more on that to come. Okay, it's been a long one, and you're probably out of that tea, and so let's wrap up.
Yes, I am out of. I totally. I agree with you there.
Yeah, it's been over almost 2.5 hours, so I think this is also where we should wrap up.
Yeah. So I hope everyone's been having a good time watching us go through this video and rip it apart, basically.
Yeah, this has been fun. I haven't really done anything like this before. This is my first stream, so it's just interesting, fun activity.
I mean, I've done after shows, but I've never one time on Snarky's channel, I was live on YouTube, but other than that was it.
And that's a nice segue to also mention that we will be having a after show. I hope you guys are following us on Twitter. We'll be posting the links there. And I hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow everybody on Twitter, do all the things. And also let us know what you thought of the format itself, and so that we know if we should continue this type of videos. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll give the others the floor.
Yeah. I mean, what can we say? This video was fucked up. I expected better.
Yeah,
we didn't get better.
Yeah, it just seemed rather ignorant and not really of the intellectual caliber that Essence of Thought does.
Yeah, granted, I disagree on some of Essence of Thought's tactics. Some of them I do disagree on. I think sometimes emotions run high, in that personal feelings sometimes get in the way of forcing through useful trans dialogue. But this I cannot fault them on, because yeah, this was a major fuck up on Woodrow's part. Any closing comments, Via?
I think she may have stepped away for a
Anyway, I hope you all liked this stream. This was an interesting endeavor, and I hope to have more of these in the future.
Indeed, this was fun, and it actually went surprisingly well. I was expecting there were some technical issues in the beginning, but the streaming quality was apparently really good.
Yeah, and I'll be sure to mess more to get that a bit more stable and also start earlier, which is a very good thing to learn.
Any closing
Also,
comments, Via? I see you're in the chat.
Also, don't forget to drink that illustrious trans blood.
Yes.
Oh shit!
trans
I wasn't pressing the button that I need to. Yeah. I wasn't
Wait.
pressing.
So you were performing trans magic. Okay, got it. Incantations.
Go ahead, Via. Do you have any last remarks before we close?
Yeah. Thank you all for having me on. It was a great time, and I hope I get to stream some more.
Totally. We will be having you and pretty much every other pagan and whatnot.
Yeah, we should.
on.
Yeah, we should definitely get other polytheists, like especially Ocean, but also Acer Pagan and the others from the Twitter sphere.
Indeed. And with that said, I think it's now time to close the stream.
One of my friends
have a good night, everybody.
To call
Have a
them
good
out.
night.
So is it okay if I do that now?
Hmm?
One of my friends is screaming at me over text to give them like a shout out or something. So should I do that now? Yeah. Hi Hannah. Thank you for screaming at me.
And with that, we'll say good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.